Hi, everyone, and welcome to Innovation Insider, the series unlocking industry expertise to uplift innovation capability. Today, I'm thrilled to announce and introduce Olly Bridge, who is an expert in sustainable peak performance with a very impressive career spanning elite sports and corporate leadership. Olly has worked with Formula One athletes, of which one I'm very jealous, Olympic gymnasts and high-performing teams in some absolute behemoth businesses like BMW and Medibank. He's also driven startups to successful exits. He's held the role of COO at a joint ASX and NASDAQ-listed health tech company. His unique approach blends wellbeing and performance in a way that drives not just results, but sustainable innovation and long-term success. So I'm very excited to have Olly join us today. Olly, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks for joining us. So I might kick off with your, as I kick off all of these and talk about secrets to innovation, but I'll sort of bring in peak performance into this because I think there are definite synergies between innovation and peak performance, which I know is a passion for you. Based on your experience with elite athletes, corporates, small teams, large teams, what do you believe are the secrets to driving effective corporate innovation while maintaining peak performance?
For me, if we think about health, there is so much different information out there, and it is confusing for people. When we think about innovation within a large corporate, there's often lots and lots of stakeholders wanting different things to come through that. And it can sometimes mean that scope creep is just a normal thing within the business that just means that the skateboard turns into a Ferrari for that MVP. And I've seen that a couple of times when I've been inside corporates, and certainly I've struggled with it when I spent some time in a startup. And, you know, in a corporate, that can go on for quite a long time without being noticed. In a startup, it becomes quite obvious quite quickly. But when we think about the sporting analogy, athletes get better when they focus on the inputs, simplifying it and doing it consistently. I would argue the same thing happens in loads and loads of different parts of our lives, right? How do we do the simple things consistently well? And if we do follow that, we feel better, we get better, but we get better performance out of it. And it doesn't take too much out of us to actually get there.
I love it. It's interesting. I share a very similar passion for focus. And I don't know if you're aware of the story, but Bill Gates and Warren Buffett became very good friends. And the first time they ever met, where they really hit it off is they found a very common passion for focus and simplicity, exactly that. And that's, I mean, you think about that as a successful partnership. Berkshire Hathaway then, went on to become one of the biggest corporate philanthropists in history and can, genuinely make a difference in the world. So I totally agree with you on there. So I've written that down. Simplicity and consistency is great. And I love the way that you've compared high performance athleticism to corporate and trust me. Yeah. I mean, I've been there. I'm preaching to the converted in the corporate where scope creep rules. And I've been that antagonizer trying to bring things back to simplicity because I'm a genuine supporter of that as well. So thank you for sharing. Okay, well let's take that and go. Okay, I think I know where you're going to go here, but I'm curious to understand is if simplicity and consistency is key to success, then what's stopping corporates doing this, and what are the barriers to innovation and effective innovation within corporates that is really just getting in the way of sustainable innovation?
Sometimes it's as simple as not having a clear endpoint. Like, what are we trying to achieve here, and what is the simplest and easiest path to get there, or at least test whether we're getting closer to there than we are right now. But also, business is a dynamic space, right? People move on, or the markets change, and different information, and that, when we go back all the years for the lean startup coming out and that pivot point and getting information quickly so we can change our view quickly. But it does take a lot of vulnerability and a lot of humility to say, actually, we need to change path here, or what we thought was going to be X is actually now Y. And that's got to be driven by obviously the right feedback and user experience and so on. But, it's probably, well, I hope this is appropriate to bring up on a podcast like this, but the little blue pill that most people have heard about, that was designed for a very different thing. But suddenly all the people that were taking it suddenly got erections, and they thought, hang on, there's a bigger market here, and we'll start to use this purely as a little blue pill for something else. And that's a silly example, but it often sticks in my mind, is to how quickly can you get that market signal that actually the market is way bigger, or the benefit is way bigger over here than it is where we were going. And if we can create systems in a big corporate where it's not looked down upon to say, hey, we thought it was left, but actually we've got more information and we need to go right, that's actually celebrated, and that's actually a real win. Those are, they're quite hard to come by, or few and far between, in terms of that fertile landscape to say, let's celebrate being wrong. Let's celebrate the learning early. Let's have really honest conversations. No one's hiding things, underneath the carpet of decisions that they made that were potentially wrong. And let's celebrate them. Let's get them early. Let's really make sure that we're actually solving the right problem here.
Yeah, I love that. I actually didn't know the story of the little blue pill. I love it, and then just I couldn't. Everything you said after that, I was just like, there's puns everywhere here, but we won't go down that rabbit hole. I believe there's I think 3M has a similar. I mean, I'm sure they do with about many of their products, but I believe WD-40 has a very similar story. I think it was originally intended for something else, and this is actually the 40th experiment or pivot they had made to then finding a problem that basically helps you, remove squeaks and open doors and open snowboard bags whose zippers might be broken after 5 years of no use, and they've calcified. I wouldn't know from experience, but and I love that. And
weight loss drugs are a perfect example that we're living through right. They've been around for 18 years from a diabetes standpoint, but actually people were losing significant amounts of weight, which is obviously a benefit for obesity and diabetes and the comorbidities. But actually taking it seriously as a weight loss tool now is hopefully going to have some really positive impacts on society with the right measures. And those that have followed me on LinkedIn will hear me say this ad nauseum, but used as a tool with the appropriate measures and checks, and making sure we're maintaining our muscle mass and so on. And I know that's not what this podcast is about, but they're an amazing tool. And that tool comes from a pivot, making sure that, the message and the signal coming from that data, we're perceptive to, that it doesn't just get washed away with all the noise. How are we perceptive to the signal that's coming out of that data?
I love it. I didn't realize that GLP-1s had been around for so long for diabetes, effective diabetes management. You think about that as in corporate innovation words around expansion of market, right? Expansion of addressable market, just enormous, and creating utility in an expanded market. I think about probably on it's in the health space, but probably more in the negative space. I think about vaping, and its origins as well was designed to help people quit smoking. I think an unintended consequence was that suddenly it's delicious and addictive, and you've got kids going, not taking up smoking now, they're actually going e-cigarettes, and then vaping is kind of this new thing. It's a expansion of market, probably not what we all hope in that way, but it's genuine commercialism, I guess, and capitalism playing out in real time, right? Back to your point around the ability to pivot, though, I think within corporate establishments, I think that's a really good point around barriers. And if I think about it, you've worked in startup, you've worked in corporate, so you've sort of seen how it probably the difference is between trying to move a ship of 5, 10, 30 people, compared to 500, 1,000, 3,000 people. It's a very easy analogy when you talk about that. When you think about that and go, well, think about all not the mouths you've got to feed, but the people you've got to convince. It's going to move a lot slower to kind of change directions on something when you've just got so many more people involved in the process, right?
Yeah, and I love, when I, as everyone did, right? You read the books about Steve Jobs and his pirates inside when they were building the first Mac, and He wanted to build, get a set of pirates from within a big business to go over almost to an island of their own. And the romanticists in us kind of make that a wonderful story of all, champagne bottles popping and iPhones and iPads and what we now see. But the lived experience of that, I think, would have been very different. And the reason I raise that is just I've got some experience in a large corporate that created a small subsidiary, small business to try and be more agile and be able to respond quickly and so on. And the theory is great, but in practice, it's incredibly hard to do, because even though you are supposed to be the quote unquote pirates, or within that, you've still got big business processes and overlays and board papers to write, and it's still challenging. So you've got the safety net of the big mothership, but with that security can sometimes, and again, like a lot of things, and it translates into health change dramatically, because it's the very insidious small changes that happen. We don't go to sleep of a healthy weight and wake up obese. It's those little changes that almost go unnoticed. And I'd say it's the same thing, even if you do start this sort of little pirate ship on the corner, it's those insidious little things that happen day on day, month on month, that just mean that there's bloat, there's less vulnerability, there's a less ability to pivot. And if you don't have the checks and balances in place, it becomes, rather than this very, very quick and easy pivot, to even harder, because you can sometimes set that expectation in the people that are in that little boat, that you're going to be the exciting, the risk takers, and they're going to be the cool pirates. Not that necessarily pirates are cool, but you get my sort of analogy.
Yeah,
I'm only using that because that's what Steve Jobs said. But you then start to get them disillusioned, because they're like, hang on, I was promised that this was going to be not like the big corporate ship, and we were going to change quickly, but now I've got to write 3 board papers around a decision that we should have made last Wednesday, and it's so you get my point. Like, I think that there are some really smart things you can try and do, but it's got to be some non-negotiables. There's got to be some rules and regulations you're putting there if you're going to make the most of that opportunity.
Yeah, love it. Thank you. We might, talking of pivots, we might talk a little bit about the kind of the link between. You talk about working as innovators in corporate organisations, and quite often when there is actually this book, one of my favourites here, Pirates in the Navy, talking about pirates as well. He talks about how companies create these innovative teams, and then suddenly you become the envy of all these people working on the core business, going, oh, they're doing all the shiny stuff. The reality is innovation's bloody hard. Like, it's not necessarily just beanbags and ping pong. And I think it's probably a mistake of corporate innovation trying to replicate what people's view of startups certainly was sort of 10, 15, 20 years ago. So it was like, oh, they're doing all the fun stuff. The reality is that it's bloody hard and it's intense. And I'm keen to then sort of talk about, if you're trying to run high performance teams and you're pushing people to the limit, and sometimes you're failing, sometimes you're trying to pivot, sometimes you're trying to drag the corporate, you're getting dragged in whatever it is. Keen to understand what you believe are kind of, I guess, the key ingredients to a high performing team from a employee wellbeing perspective. Is what does a high-performing team look like, and how do you keep people at their best through their well-being?
Oh, now you're on a topic that I could talk for days on. I know we don't have it. So, my philosophy all the way back from working with elite sports people into working now with the corporate athlete, the people like you and me now working in corporate space, is the 3-legged stool. So this 3-legged stool for me is physical activity, nutrition, and recovery. So those are the 3 legs of this 3-legged stool. And I always use this as the fundamental sort of starting point of balance, because a 3-legged stool is really balanced if all those 3 legs are on the ground. But as soon as one of those legs lifts, it's an unstable base, and we can't build anything on the top of that. anyone that's seen me talk or been to one of my sessions will hear me talk about this. And so when we talk about it from an athlete standpoint, my frustration every time there's a World Championships, every time there's an Olympics, we always hear about an athlete that hasn't been able to perform because of overtraining. Now, overtraining syndrome in the athletic world is just like burnout in the corporate world. There is too much sort of stress going into the top of the bucket and the water has overflowed over the bucket, or that stool has become unstable and people fall over. When we talk about a corporate space, we're just talking about a stressor, and a stress isn't bad, right? Chronic stress is, but acute stressors, well, that's what I used to do to my athletes in the gym. I created the stimulus that was stressful and then provided them the right fuel, the nutrition, the right building blocks, and the right recovery protocol, so that the stimulus was then given the environment that it needed to elicit the change to make the driver drive faster or athlete run faster, jump higher, or whatever it is. Corporate world's no different. We need to make sure that any stressful time is counterbalanced with this recovery and the right building blocks. And I think that in startup, it becomes acutely important to make sure that if we're running a delivery cadence, you know, whether it be every 2-week delivery or whatever it may be for the agile processes that they're using, the retros, when we get busy, seem to be the first thing that go out the window. Like, how do we get smarter when we realize what we did wrong, right? So retros are so important, but they're the first cab off the rank when the pressure comes on and we've got to deliver more, right? So retros are super important because we have that chance to show gratitude and recover and get that dopamine and oxytocin of being in a team environment and feeling like we've really won, even if it's just one little element and one delivery. But managing that stressful event and that recovery protocol so that we can go through the natural process is really great for people. And we, you know, giving people the best environment at work isn't reducing all stress, isn't making them completely comfortable. It's about allowing them the control themselves to be able to modulate when they need to grow and when they need to recover, right? And it's that I think we get wrong so often. And my philosophy has kind of expanded over the years as I've worked with more people in the corporate space, because, you know, what was appropriate for an elite athlete back in the 90s isn't necessarily appropriate for a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. No. The theory is still the same. It's about how are we making sure that we're listening to the signals that our bodies are giving us. Do we need a time of recovery? And, you know, making sure that we're creating a safe space for people to be able to show up and say, hey, I'm on full throttle at the moment, and I'm in need of some recovery time.
So I'm gonna pivot a little bit again here. I'm curious to maybe understand, go a little bit deeper on that. A lot of people who watch this or listen to this will be primarily in white collar, often sedentary type roles, working in teams, individually, mix of at home, in the office, you know, kind of that hybrid model. Often in those high, you know, coming with a stressor of employment, coming in with expectations. Do you have a set of, and maybe it's diving too much into your, you know, essentially build a bridge here, and this might be IP, but whatever you're willing to share is, do you have a kind of, you know, practical tips around what a good workday should look like? If you're someone like me who's working at home, let's assume I'm working for a complex organization or a large corporate in innovation, very much have to be self-motivated. My employer will have things that, you know, look after me and can help my well-being. But how do I be my best self at work through to be, you know, create I'll leave it at that, actually.
Well, the first thing is to make sure that you really hold the reins with that. Expecting the government or your employer to do it for you, it just isn't going to work, unfortunately. So we know that when we're in a stressful situation, or when we're underslept, or when we're emotional, we don't always make the right decisions for ourselves. So it's about setting up the right systems to catch us. James Clear's book talks about, we don't fall to the level of our motivation, we fall down to the level of our systems and processes. So we need those things and those nudges. I know that's a dirty word nowadays, but we need these nudges now to really catch us when we're just on autopilot. So, a really simple thing for me is an egg timer on my desk. If I'm doing deep work, setting that to 20 minutes so that I stand up, just breaking our seated time has a dramatic impact in the way that we feel, the way that we process things, the oxygenated blood getting to our brain for new ideas. Just break every half an hour. Breaking up our seated time is a massive one. The other one is getting out into nature. We are creatures that evolved to be outside, and if we're not seeing natural light, if we're not seeing the sun in the sky at different heights, it really plays around with our sleep. And so one of the simplest things I can say to people is break up your seated time and make sure you go outside 3 times a day. Go out after your breakfast, after your lunch, after your dinner. Just literally, it can be as short as 10 minutes. Just do one lap of the block, even if it's like a fake commute, right? If you're not commuting to work anymore, how do you just do a couple of laps of the local area? Not only you'll see the sun, you'll get some fresh views on difficult things and problems you're trying to solve, but hopefully you'll bump into a few people as you're outside, and social connection is something that we're really struggling with. So when we can habit stack, the habit stacking of that is, I know when this goes off, I stand up. I know when I consume food, I go outside and go for a walk, come rain, hail or shine. Those habits, I know when I brush my teeth, I practice my mindfulness. These nudges and this habit stacking just mean that those processes I can rely on. Those systems are there to save me from myself. There's loads more. Obviously, the food that we eat needs to be, the right building blocks and high fiber and high protein and not ultra processed foods and so on. But this podcast will probably go too long if we go into every single one of them. But breaking up seated time, getting outside, having a chat to real people, connecting with your network as much as possible, and making sure that we're kind of resetting our circadian rhythm so we can focus on our sleep. Those are really, really key things that our genome has been built around having, and our modern society has slowly but surely sort of taken out of our daily lives. And to finish it on, what I try and get people to think about is, Dr. David Katz in the US talks about a polar bear in the Sahara Desert. Our genetic code is diametrically opposed to the environment we find ourselves in. So if we think of ourselves as that polar bear in the Sahara Desert, those two things aren't working that well. And the chronic disease that we're struggling with is a ramification of us being an environment that is diametrically opposed to what our genes are asking for. So having things like this, having nudges, stickers, post-it notes on our mirrors to remind us to be mindful, or every time we put the kettle on, we do 5 push-ups. These little things add up. And again, what I was saying earlier about simplicity and consistency, it's pretty simple to do 5 push-ups, even from your knees, whichever way. Simple, but it's really, really not easy to do because we've got this environment that's telling us not to do it. So trying to put these little trick points and these nudges in our day can massively help get that recovery and get our bodies working the way we were supposed to.
I love it. And I love that not all innovation needs to be an app or needs to be digital as well. It's, you've got a simple egg timer, you've got a toothbrush, you've got your food that you're eating. They are your triggers. They are your nudges. I love that. I love that. Also the polar bear in the Sahara, best. I'm going to use that one. That's fantastic. Maybe then let's talk about that and talk about the future of self-care, of employee well-being, or well-being as someone who works for an established organization. What are you seeing? Are there exciting things you're seeing? What are you seeing happening in the next 5 to 10 years in that space? What innovations are kind of getting you excited that you think can actually improve the well-being of workers?
Yeah, so this is really exciting. So there's never been a better time to be able to get data on you. So the challenge, though, for the last 15 years is I've always said we're absolutely drowning in data, but we're thirsty for insight. And so we really need to make sure that we're not getting absolutely bamboozled by all this data. We're just able to hear the signal that's coming from that, like I've said a couple of times. And so things like Aura rings that I'm wearing here, it's a really passive way. There we go. Really passive way to find out, how did I recover last night? What's my heart rate variability? And what do I need to do today that I wouldn't have done if I didn't have that data? And so the 3 stages of get the information, interpret the information, and then put in a plan to remedy anything that you've found is a really key thing. And it's never been easier and cheaper for us to do. And so one of the things that I think is an imperative that we should all do is make sure that we're working with our healthcare practitioners, whether it's our GP or our physio or whatever, to make sure we get our numbers every single year. So go for the DEXA scan, find out what your muscle mass is, find out what your bone mineral density is, find out what your visceral fat is. Use that information and hopefully some blood tests if you need to, or if your GP says you to. Look at your Aura ring data. How did you sleep? Do you need to do some pre-sleep activity? And what I mean by that is, if we as individuals view going to sleep in the same way as we do going to the gym, we do a warm-up before our gym routine. It's not a passive process, it's an active process. Sleep is exactly the same. Sleep is an active process. It's where we get smarter, it's where we modulate our emotions and hormones. It's a really active process. So we need to prepare for that. So making sure that we're doing our breathing exercises or a hot shower, or making sure that our room is cold, dark, and quiet. These things we can modify once we know what the data is telling us. And it's never been cheaper for us to get that. It's never been easier. And so we've got to do that. And so I'm really excited by that. And that's really why, and Essentio is called Essentio because it's the essentials. We're trying to simplify all of the information that people are hearing to the real personalized basics for them. Like, what is it that your data is signaling you to do? And so for a lot of our executives, it is that recovery space. It is that I've got a lot of stress in the job that I'm doing. I've got a lot going on. I've got to make sure that if I'm making decisions, I'm making decisions with the best position possible. And we know that we don't make the best decisions when we're sleep deprived, when we're eating ultra processed foods and we haven't moved for 2 hours. Like, there's plenty of evidence to prove that out. So I'm excited about the innovation now. It's because the everyday person now can get a lot of that information where they couldn't previously. A DEXA scan is an amazing tool and it costs $90. Is
that right?
It's an Aura rings, it's $500. And I know that's a lot of money, but put that over a 5-10 year period, it's a drop in the ocean, right? So I think that ability for us to get data is really accessible. Trying to find someone to work with to interpret that and build a plan with, and then hopefully we're starting to hear the signal that being alone and being isolated is having detrimental impact on our well-being overall as a species. And I know that the data isn't showing it that we're improving it, but certainly the messaging that's coming out is that this is really, really bad for us, and we really, really need to do something about it. And maybe I'm a biased audience because I spend all my day every day in this kind of space, but I definitely feel the conversations have moved a long way around this, in terms of this isn't just a nice to have. Sorry, as my dog barks at the neighbors. This is something that we absolutely actively have to fight against. It's not going to happen by osmosis. We've got to really feed our networks and feed our friendships and feed our interactions, because it is down to our very DNA necessary. We know that in sort of evolutionary perspective, if we were ostracized from the group, from the tribe, it was a death sentence. Our brain still thinks that. If we are isolated, if we are lonely, our brain is telling us, we can't sleep because we haven't got someone to look after us while we sleep. We could get eaten. It's down to our very, very DNA. So, I'm excited because there's a lot more information now that's readily available and is relatively cheap. What I'm worried about is the messaging coming through a lot of the media platforms is confusing as hell and hard for people to actually interpret signal from noise, and trying to make that easy for people isn't easy.
Yeah, that was going to lead into my next question in terms of, are you seeing green shoots of kind of motivation to change? And we're seeing increasing obesity across the globe, and in Australia, we're seeing increased mental health issues. We're probably, I'm making an assumption here that we're probably seeing sleep deprivation. We're seeing sleep patterns progressively get worse. What's going to trigger enough change? There's people like yourself who are very performance focused and understand the value of your health. Have we reached the tipping point? Are we going to reach a tipping point? What's going to sort of? I hope to see that there are more people who are health. We are seeing, on the counter of this increasing health consciousness, which is a positive. Are there other trends that are, supporting a better future for our collective health?
I believe there is. I don't have any hard data that I can point towards. Yes, there's more spending in wellness, but that's a pretty broad umbrella that they term the wellness space. A lot of them, as you and I have spoken about previously, a lot of that money is spent in a different ecosystem in the US that sometimes muddies the waters for us here in Australia and New Zealand. I trained in the UK, and still my friends and family are based there, and so I hear a lot of what's going on there as well. It's hard for me to be unbiased, I'll be honest. The fact that I work in this space, the fact that my mortgage and school fees are paid through this space, I've got to believe that there is a really healthy market here. But the challenge that comes with that is the market is hard at the moment. Cost of living is incredibly difficult at the moment, and lots of people are doing it tough. And so if we're not careful, well-being and health becomes a thing that I'll get to when I find time. And it becomes this, unfortunately, this paradoxical position where actually, if you focused on your health and well-being now, you're far more likely to solve the things that you're trying to solve for that you think you need to solve before you get to your health. But that's an easy thing to say when you're not under stress, worried about food on the table, worried about the mortgage, worried about whatever it is that's occupying your mind space at the time. So there is a huge hope within me that we are starting to get to the point where we can democratize a lot of the things and a lot of the benefits that have been only available to quite a small sliver of the population previously. And we touched on that a few moments ago with things becoming more affordable. But there's got to be that desire. And when life is busy, as I said a few moments ago, when life is busy, when we're underslept, we're under stress, our reptilian brain just kicks in and we respond by reflex, rather than taking that step back and saying, okay, where do I need to put my efforts now so that I can perform better tomorrow? And like for me, I've got so many key moments in both my life but also clients' lives that I've worked with that really just shout so loudly that if you focus on the balance of that stool, you are far more likely to get the best out of home and work than if you don't. There is a part though where that epiphany often happens when someone has that life experience of either they have that epiphany themselves, or someone in their family or friendship group has an adverse health event and they wake up that maybe it's time for me to do something.
Which I guess we're probably going to see more of with the way that we're, some of those trends that I talked about before. So perhaps that is the triggers that society needs to motivate ourselves to be healthier. we might pivot just one more time, just to talk about unpopular opinions. So you're a guy with conviction. That's one of the things I really admire about you. I do wonder if you have an unpopular opinion or belief around innovation or well-being that others in your industry may disagree with.
Probably the one that I hear the most is, and it goes against actually what I've just said about spending money, but you don't have to throw money at a health problem, always. Sometimes it's the little free things that we underestimate the impact they'll have based on their cost. So we can go out into the ocean, some of us. We can get out into greenery, some of us. But between those two options, most people have access to at least one of them. You know, we can get out and move our body as slow as you need to. We can access nutritious food, but it's hard. But these are often very, very low cost solutions to things that will compound up to really big changes. One of the things that I struggle with is this intensity over consistency. You know, it doesn't count unless you're uncomfortable, or it doesn't count until you're in pain. Like these are really unhealthy things for people to hear all the time. And whilst we know that some really important things happen when we get out of breath and when we push our bodies a little bit further, if that is a barrier, just go out for a really simple light walk. Momentum breeds momentum. And you know, when we split up mental health from physical health to emotional health, I just think we're crazy. You know, we are one ecosystem, and what we eat affects how we feel. The way we think affects the way that we move. Emotion is 90% motion, right? So if we're feeling emotional, get out and move our body, and it's amazing how we change the way we feel. And so how do we try and get this I'll start tomorrow mentality into I'll just start small today? And the compound interest of that over time does change health behaviors and does change health status. And I just don't think that we as an industry have done well enough to say it doesn't matter where you start as long as you do start.
I love it. Absolutely love it. Emotion is 90% motion. Again, you're giving me so much here. This is amazing. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much. We might just now talk about you and your businesses. You've obviously got Essentio. You're wearing the shirt today. You've got Build a Bridge. I'm sure you've got your fingers in many pies. But I'll hand over to you to talk about what you do, any businesses that you're working on, and kind of what you're excited about, and then finally how people can get in touch with you and use your services, or just to, like you say, follow you on LinkedIn and catch up on some wisdom, like some of these quotes, polar bears in the Sahara. How do we get in contact? But maybe start about with Essentio and Build a Bridge if you can.
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough to have two businesses. I share Essentio Health with Justin Vaughan in Sydney, the ex-New Zealand cricketer. And this is where we work one-on-one with leaders around their own health and performance. And essentiohealth.com is our website. Love to hear from anyone that thinks that we might be able to help them. We do DNA testing, we do blood tests, we do a DEXA scan, we do a whole battery of tests around the individual that allows us to really get into the mind, body and soul of the human to then help them. And then Build a Bridge is a business I've had for the last 18 years. And with that, I run workshops and keynotes and conferences around health and performance. So the two businesses are very, very complementary. You know, a lot of people, when I used to get off stage, would say, hey, how do I work one-on-one with you? And when I had a corporate job, I just had no capacity. Now with Essentio, there's a really simple way. And equally, when we work with leaders, they say, oh, how do we get this message out at scale? And obviously, the workshops and keynotes and so on is a good way to do that. So I genuinely mean this. I am absolutely blessed. I love what I do. I feel very, very lucky. And I'm at the cold face of actually helping real people with real challenges in their lives. So I feel unbelievably blessed. And with Build a Bridge, it's just ollybridge.com if anyone wants to grab me on that. But as I say, they're both businesses that really filter into each other and cross-pollinate each other, which is beautiful.
Amazing. Well, Olly, thank you very much. And in terms of following you, obviously LinkedIn, Olly Bridge, any other sort of key ways to get in touch? Or you said ollybridge.com.
Yeah, just essentiohealth.com, ollybridge.com, and on LinkedIn, but either Build a Bridge, Essentio, or Olly Bridge.
Perfect. Well, Olly, thank you very much. There's absolute snippets of gold everywhere here. The three-legged stool, the polar bear, the emotion. It's just, honestly, I can't wait to go back and read through the transcript, because I reckon I've got a whole whiteboard of quotes here to use for my personal benefit. But look, I'm sure everyone watching this is going to get as much value out of the chat as I have, and I'm very grateful for your time. So thank you very much, Olly.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.